Well, welcome to the CSAE podcast series, Best Minds in Associations. My name is Bob Golden. I have the honor of being the 2020-21 president of the Colorado Society Association Executives. And we've been really pleased with this podcast series, and we got a great one for you today. We're honored to have Gabriel Eckert with us today. Good morning, Gabriel.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Gabriel hails out of Atlanta, Georgia, and Gabriel is the CEO of the Building and Owners Managers Association of Georgia. He also is a recognized national or nonprofit speaker, facilitator, consultant, and author. And he also holds two designations. We all know what the CAE is, Certified Association Executives, but also FASAE, which means basically professional certification, post-nominal designation that may be used by ASAE fellows in good standing to represent their status as a fellow of ASAE. And that's kind of special, Gabriel, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today.
Well, we're excited to chat with you. We've got a number of things to talk about. So I mentioned earlier, Gabriel is an author, and he's written a number of books. We're going to talk about a couple of them this morning. I know one with CSAE, Gabriel, it's very popular. As a matter of fact, I went on the website and it said it's not available. So I don't know if it means it's sold out or what. I'm sure you can get us more if people are interested. But the book is called From Insight to Action. And just written by Gabriel. There was a co-author with you, wasn't there?
That's right. Gene Frankel, internationally recognized consultant and a great partner on that project.
So before I ask you a few questions about the book, just kind of give us kind of an oversight of what you felt when you wrote that book. What was your intent and purpose, and who was the book written for?
Yeah, so Gene and I, embarked on this journey to write the book really from a leadership perspective. And so it dives into some emerging leadership competencies that we felt were very important for not just nonprofit professionals, but really leaders in general. So the research that we conducted certainly looked at the tax-exempt sector. And we also talked to leaders in the for-profit sector, as well as government and NGO as well. And the research really kind of distilled down for us kind of two pieces. One, what are those leadership competencies? And then secondly, how do we really thrive as an ecosystem within the organizations that we represent?
So I've got a few things from the book that I want to ask you about, and I certainly have to. I think the first one I got to go to is understanding change, right? And who knew, 16, 18 months ago, we were going to go through what we've gone through. But we're coming out of it, right? I mean, CSAE has had a couple of in-person sessions. We have our conference at the end of the month, and we're pretty excited about it. But how has COVID, how has the pandemic, when you talk about understanding change, how do you think, Gabriel, that's affected our colleagues in the nonprofit world?
I think this COVID experience has given us such a great opportunity to really understand how we deal with change, because we were all just thrust into it, right? So we're going about our lives, we're doing our work, we're helping people, and then all of a sudden the world dramatically changes. And so one of the first things that I think this COVID experience has taught us is about our natural response to change. And these are not good or bad things, but I think we can all think back, especially to the early days of the pandemic, and how did we feel? What were we thinking? What type of questions did we ask? And what was that natural response we have to go through such a sustained level of uncertainty and change? Some people naturally thrive on change and run toward it as an individual. Others of us might really absorb change differently and want to try to shy away from it. Neither of these are good or bad things, but it's helpful for us as leaders to really understand what is our natural response to change, because it helps us to lead more effectively. The companion piece to this, I think, is really important, is that during times of intense stress or change, we often also revert back to those natural behavioral styles. And so we see this as individuals, but we also see it collectively in the boards of directors or committees or staff teams in which we work. So I think one of the other things that was a great opportunity for us throughout the pandemic experience was not just to look at our own leadership style and natural response to that change, but also collectively, how were the members we're dealing with, the boards and committees, how were we as a whole also going through that sustained period of uncertainty as well?
So you said something just a little bit about kind of running into change, and it reminded me the Green Hornet, that was his big thing, as he ran into danger. So I think a lot of us did do that. But what do you think our colleagues, what should we be very cognizant of as we move forward? And then do you think we're better for what we've gone through? Do you think we've learned? What's your personal opinion on that?
Going forward, I think it's really caused a reset in terms of expectations from members and stakeholders in some ways. And one of the ways that I think that that's becoming evident now is that, we've never actually had the luxury of time in terms of perfecting the programs, products, and services that we create through our organizations. But I think the COVID experience caused us to become even more efficient. And if you will, kind of beta testing even more along the way to say that there's an immediate need today, but as information changes, as the dynamic that we're living in changes, maybe 3 weeks or a month and a half from now, that need is gone. So we had to be much more real time in adapting to our member and stakeholder needs throughout the pandemic. I think that stays in a lot of ways. I think our members are now very accustomed to just in time education, just in time resources that get at the immediate need that they're facing. There's another really interesting observation that we had at the Building Owners and Managers Association of Georgia, and I know so many nonprofit leaders had this as well, which was that we have an opportunity to serve people holistically. I think a lot of organizations have gotten very good, obviously, at the nuts and bolts of what our members need from a technical aspect of how they do their jobs. COVID also reminded us that we're whole people and that we were able to deliver programs and services and education and support in areas like stress management, mindfulness, prioritization, dealing with prolonged times of uncertainty, all of these things that we grapple with on a human scale, on a human nature. And I think, again, that's something that should stick with us as organizational leaders, to not just look through the lens of purely business, but look at the members and people that we have an opportunity to serve holistically with that human side as well. So you ask another question, which is, has this made us better? What's the result? I think, again, COVID had so many silver linings for us. It really caused us to stop and reflect and say, what is truly the most important things in my life? What are truly the most important things that as a leader we can deliver to help people and help organizations throughout that pandemic and beyond? And the other thing that I will say, and I've said this before, is that 2020 and now into 2021 has given us the best opportunity we will probably ever have in our lifetimes for entrepreneurial thinking and for creative change, because we had to. And so it's given us so much flexibility to dream and to explore and to try and to help people in new ways. And that's done nothing but made us better as leaders and as a community.
Awesome, awesome thoughts. Do you think our members generally are more appreciative of our organizations than maybe they were before we went through all this?
That's a really good question. And what my gut tells me, and what my conversations with scores of organizational leaders at a variety of organizations over the last year and a half have told me, is a really interesting answer. It depends. And I think it depends on how we responded as an organization to the needs at the time. Some organizations, your Green Lantern example, just you kind of just run at it, or Green Hornet, and you just kind of run at it, right? And you help and you serve and you try to do the best you can. Those organizations that really stood up quick and identified needs and began to solve the problems and the challenges, or at least help them for our members and stakeholders, we see so much affinity for organizations like that. For other organizations that maybe were caught into a pattern of inertia that didn't really break out of that to provide those resources initially, I think they're struggling more. I've had conversations with some of our members in particular who were very happy about our response to COVID. We produced more than 100 webinars, videos, electronic resources, and other materials just on COVID last year, which we served nationally, not just through our own membership base. There's a handful of our members that said, you know what, based on the COVID experience, we've actually cut our membership and support for every organization except for BOMA, because we saw the value of what you delivered. I think organizations that stood up and provided concrete value and solved problems are getting a lot of affinity, but unfortunately, those that maybe took a different path are probably not.
Yeah, I mean, you can never get enough confirmation from the members that what you're doing is meaningful to them. So great point. So another bullet point, and then I want to move on to your new book, 360-degree thinking. I honestly don't know. I've tried to figure out what that means. I don't know if you stand on a thing and spin around 360 while you're thinking, or explain that to our audience, Gabriel, if you will.
Well, and your analogy really, is kind of on point in some ways, because if you're standing on something kind of spinning around, what are you doing? You're trying to get all the different perspectives, all the different information that you can have to make a decision. And at its base, that's really what 360 thinking is about. I like to talk about something that sounds a little wonky. It's the Herman Brain Dominance Indicator. You can look it up online, HBDI. But basically, the premise here is that we as humans are hardwired to naturally think in four different ways. Some of us think about facts, the details that we're presented with. Some of us are naturally thinking about the form or the process or the steps that it takes to accomplish something. Others of us have very much a future orientation about where we're headed, maybe the strategy, the vision of what's going to be better or different in the future. And then finally, some of us are hardwired to think about feelings or that people orientation of having that center in front of mind as we're making decisions. 360 thinking just causes us to stop and say, naturally, how am I hardwired as an individual? It's not good or bad, it's not right or wrong, but we're all hardwired in a certain way. We then take another step to say, collectively, let's say as a board of directors, how are we naturally hardwired? Through my consulting work, I typically find that a lot of organizations tend to attract, a lot of professions rather, tend to attract certain people that are hardwired in certain ways. So you might have a predominance of left brain or right brain thinkers just by the nature of the type of work that you do. What this could cause organizations to see in terms of their boards of directors is that we're all having very similar thoughts in terms of how we make decisions. The process might be missing one or two of those four quadrants that I just mentioned between the facts, form, future, and feelings. And so it's simply an opportunity for us to say, how are we hardwired individually? How are we hardwired as a team? What are the gaps that we might see that we're missing? And then how do we address those gaps? I'll say one final thing about addressing those gaps, because it's really relatively easy once you start to think about it. The thing that I would suggest that we do as leaders is if we see that we as a group, whether it's a board or a staff team, or maybe kind of collectively thinking about three of those quadrants between the facts, form, feelings, and future as we're making decisions, but we're missing one, I would say let's do a short exercise to say, if we were thinking about, say, feelings, for example, what type of questions would we ask to make a better decision? And just always stop and say, are we really asking questions in all of these four ways? Because when we do, we know that it produces better decisions.
So I'm gonna throw something at you that what isn't on my script, but it just came to my mind. What about decision making in fear? How does fear come in to being a good leader?
So I think you hit on something really important. And we think back to, say, March of 2020 or April of 2020. And I think there was a lot of fear for some people, right? In some organizations, because I think a lot of this in life, we're obviously prepared for recessions, maybe not as much a pandemic, right? Prior to 2020. At least for
Right.
me, it's not something I had ever really considered
Neither
that
had
would
I.
happen during my life. So we do have this natural kind of fear or uncertainty that can set in individually or collectively. What I found that was really helpful for organizations was for us to be able to just, again, understand, where am I? What am I feeling, and acknowledge that in a very non-judgmental way, really in an observational rather than judgmental way. And to be able to have very candid conversations with our staff teams and with our individual leaders as well about what they're feeling and what they're thinking. I'm sure you can relate to this. Almost every conversation I would have with a staff partner or a board member or a leader was about, how are you today? And not the superficial, but really getting into it. And again, you talk about silver linings. We learned so much about how we deal with that fear or uncertainty, but also about each other's personal lives because we needed to be vulnerable. And I think that ability for us to be vulnerable, to authentically care about others and what's going on, has again helped us to make better decisions.
Yeah, beautiful. Really, really well put. Yeah, it's been a very personal experience, I think, for a lot of us, a lot of our colleagues, but I think we're better for it. And I mean, I missed the going out to dinner part, and we're making up for lost time on that, but definitely in a better place. So your most recent book called Strategic Integration, and we talked briefly before we started the podcast this morning about it's designed to help people with a strategic planning implementation. And I don't want to screw it up any worse than that, but I think that's a great topic. And so tell us a little bit about that book.
Yeah, thank you for asking. And so this was a project, again, published by the American Society of Association Executives in collaboration with Bob Harris as a co-author on this particular
Okay.
book. So, the essence here is that you think about all the time and resources that we spend into crafting strategic plans, but how many times do we actually see that organizations, that plan's just stuck on a shelf or it's stuck in the cloud? And we really need to have the skill sets and competencies to implement it well. So the research that we did in this particular project was to look at what are some of the steps that we can take to make sure that our strategy is actually implemented. One of the core competencies that we saw is just something we call simplicity. I mean, you think about the strategic plans that we've seen in our lives, and how many times do our eyes just kind of glaze over because they're so dense? How can we get to the essence of what our members actually need and want and distill that down into a one pager or something very short and concise that gets across the strategy of what we're doing in a way that's digestible and understandable, and actually from a board standpoint, repeatable, and from a staff standpoint, implementable. The simplicity also causes us to say sometimes, I've seen this in some consulting work, that organizations set a strategic plan, and let's say there's like maybe 35 things you're trying to accomplish over a period of 3 to 5 years. Um, Less is more. So the ability for us to really focus and prioritize only just a couple things at once gives organizations such focus and drive to actually get through a strategic plan quicker rather than trying to tackle everything at once. And the other thing, I guess, I mean, there's a few different areas in the book that we can get deeper into, but one area that I think really ties into this COVID experience a lot is something we call iterative innovation. For so long, I think organizations have felt pressure to almost perfect what we're trying to do for members before we launch. Going back again to this pandemic, one of the great silver linings has been that we did not have time to perfect, that we needed to help now, and that we could go through what we call an iterative innovation process of understanding a need, delivering on that need, getting feedback on what we did, and then making revisions and deliver again. So this continual cycle, almost like on tech, I think about my iPhone, or actually more on the Windows, it seems like on my PC, it's never finished. There's always an update. There's always a
Yeah.
patch. There's always a something. We can learn from the tech sector and the nonprofit sector as well to say, we don't have to be perfect. We can help and get feedback and learn in an iterative way.
So I remember I've been around a long time, but I remember the days of the 3-day strategic planning retreat, which resulted in a notebook of information that you alluded to earlier that was complex and it was confusing. It was like, where do I start? So kind of drilling into that a little bit, and I think this could be helpful for our listening audience. Whose responsibility is it when creating a strategic plan to develop something? Because I'm in your camp 100%, Gabriel. I mean, I don't think I've seen at least plans that I've worked with that have been more than one page because it just gets a little too much. Whose responsibility is it the facilitator, or is it the executive director, CEO, to meld it down into a manageable document that can be implemented, or
Well, I
both?
think it's a good question. And I think it's a partnership, right? And so some of this is driven by organizational culture and expectations. And so I think from a CEO perspective, how we set and calibrate expectations for our board or for our strategic planning participants is incredibly important, because we all come from different perspectives. And if we can very early on understand what it's going to look like to cross that finish line, then I think that's helpful. But I think also just having a good facilitator partner is extremely important to be able to distill down into the essence of what we're trying to do. Now, this is supported by work plans, right? So, I mean, the staff's
Sure.
going to take what this one pager, what a short couple page plan might be, and build out some business plans or implementation plans for the projects that we're going to try to accomplish strategically. But from a board standpoint, from my perspectives, it's too much to have all that with the board. And really zeroing in on what are the higher level things you're trying to accomplish, what's the what, not the how. And then we also get into the book about some tools that boards of directors can use to maintain, let's say, a high level overview of what's happening without getting into the weeds. So I'll share with you one of the examples I really like is just simply providing a visual timetable for a board of directors to look at over a 12 or 16-month period. What are the key milestones that are going to occur? and flag those to specific months over that period of time. So as we come into a board of directors meeting, number one, going back to calibrating expectations, we can all understand where we're supposed to be on a project, and we can have a conversation about where we are versus where we thought we would be. And it also helps us to get away from conversations about why isn't X, Y, or Z done yet, because perhaps then you look at the timeline and that's not pegged to occur for another couple months.
It's interesting you say that. I remember going through a retreat one time, and it was a 1 day, 2/3 of a day, and all the board and participants left, and one of my team members looked at me and said, "Well, how do you think that went, and what do you think the board is thinking?" And I said, "Well, I can tell you, they're already in their cars. They're already on University Boulevard right now, so they're not thinking anything about the retreat, or maybe, but." For us, right, for the executive directors and the CEOs and the staff, it's a real deal, and it's a working document. So great insights on that. Interesting you bring up Bob Harris. I was the president of the Florida Society of Association Executives a gazillion years ago. Bob was on my board, and I've always referred to him as Yoda of the whole thing, because he is quite insightful. So Gabriel, any other thoughts you want to share with our group? This has been great. I think you've given us some really very productive thoughts, but anything else that you want to share from your perspective with our listening audience today, with anything in the association world?
I think the thing that I would end on, and this is covered in our strategic integration book as well, is just really expressing sincere gratitude for the individuals that we work with. We talked a lot about the pandemic. We talked a lot about uncertainty and dealing with change, and about kind of the human side of what we grapple with within organizations and within just our personal lives. What a great opportunity it is for us to continually be reminded to say thank you in meaningful ways, both big and small, to really sincerely appreciate the contributions of those on our team, whether it be staff or whether it be member volunteers. Because at the end of the day, we've got so much on our minds and so much on our plates that when we choose to allocate time to a project that's meaningful for us, it's a great opportunity for us as leaders to recognize that and to sincerely express that gratitude as well.
What a tremendous message. What a great way to end. Gabriel Eckert, thank you for your time today. I hope things are good in Georgia, and we appreciate what you have shared and your contribution at the ASA level and the CSAE level, et cetera, et cetera. Just want to remind everybody, these podcasts, the Best Minds in Associations, can be found at csae.org. And we appreciate you being part of CSAE, and appreciate you listening to these podcast series. Thanks again, Gabriel.
Thank you so much.